Have you ever wished life came with, a blueprint? A guide that shows you exactly how your character and your choices build your future? Well, today we're going to crack open an ancient one. We're diving into Proverbs 29, a chapter that reveals how every single thing we do puts us on one of two very different paths.
Think of this chapter like a fork in the road, and every single verse we're about to look at is like a signpost, showing us exactly where each path leads. So come on, let's start walking down this road together and see this story unfold.
Our journey begins right at the top, with leadership. It's amazing how the character of just one person, whether they're stubborn or wise, can create these huge ripple effects that touch absolutely everyone in a community. So let's dive in and see how this plays out. All right, verse 1 kicks things off with this really powerful image of the path to ruin. I want you to picture a clay pot. Someone comes along and gently taps it. That's a warning, right? A chance to change. But instead of softening, the pot gets harder, more brittle. Tap, another warning. Tap, it just keeps getting more and more rigid until one last final tap, and it just shatters. It explodes into dust. And that's it. You can't piece it back together. It's destroyed, totally without remedy. Now, verse 2 shows us just how big the ripple effect of leadership is. On one side, when the leaders are righteous, you see a city that's just basking in sunlight. People are celebrating, they're happy. But flip that coin. Under a wicked ruler, that very same city is dark. It's under a cloud, and everyone is hunched over, groaning. You see, leadership isn't just about rules and laws. It actually sets the whole mood for everyone. So in verses 3 and 4, we see how this principle of character starts small and then gets huge. Verse 3 starts right in the home. You can just see a father, beaming with pride, putting a hand on his wise son's shoulder. Just pure joy. Then, verse 4 takes that same idea and blows it up to the kingdom level. Now it's a king, and his steady hand is balancing these golden scales of justice. And that fairness becomes the bedrock, the very foundation holding his entire land together. It all begins with wisdom. Okay, verses 5, 6, and 7 are like these three quick, intense scenes about justice. First up, in verse 5, picture a flatterer laying down this gorgeous rug for his friend, but the second his friend steps on it, boom, it turns into a net. Then, in verse 6, you see an evil man who's gotten tangled up in his own trap, struggling, while a righteous person just walks right by, singing, completely free. And finally, verse 7 shows us the core difference. The righteous person gets down on their knees to help someone who's poor. The wicked, they just walk right on by, like the person isn't even there.
Okay, so we've seen actions. Now, the scene shifts and we're zooming in on the power of our words. We're about to see how communication and self-control can literally build up a community or burn it right to the ground. Verse 8 paints this absolutely terrifying picture. Imagine someone whispering a rumor. And as they do, a tiny spark flies from their mouth. And that one little spark lands and ignites a fire that just consumes an entire city. That's the power of scoffing. Then in verse 9, you see how useless it is to argue with a fool. A wise person is trying to be calm, to reason, but the fool on the other side is either just screaming with rage or laughing like it's all a big joke. And what do you get? Just total chaos. There is no peace. So in verse 10, it's like we see this gut reaction. People who live in the shadows, they can't stand someone who shines with light. You can just see these dark figures glaring at someone who is bright and blameless. Then, verse 11 shows this incredible contrast in how we handle our feelings. A fool is like a volcano, just erupting, spewing hot lava and destruction everywhere. But the wise man, he's standing there, perfectly calm, holding a massive, powerful storm contained inside a small glass orb. And this just leaves you with a really big question, right, for all of us. Where is the real strength? Is it in that huge, explosive outburst? Or is it in the quiet, incredible power of restraint? This chapter seems to have a very clear answer. And verse 12 shows just how this kind of poison spreads. Picture a king on his throne. He leans in to listen to a whispering liar. And as he's listening, you can literally watch the color drain out of his servants standing nearby. They all start to look shadowy, deceptive, just like the liar. It just shows how corruption is like a virus, spreading from the top down. All right, so we're pulling the camera back now, looking at the bigger picture. We're moving from individual words and actions to the very pillars that hold a society together. Things like justice for everybody, clear discipline, and having a vision that actually guides people. Now, verses 13 and 14 get right down to the heart of things, equality and justice.
In verse 13, imagine a poor farmer and a rich landowner standing right next to each other, and a single beam of light from heaven shines down on both of them. It shows that God gives light to both their eyes. Then, in verse 14, picture a king sitting on a throne made of flimsy wood. But as he delivers a fair, true judgment for a poor person, that wooden throne starts to transform. It becomes solid, unshakable stone. That's the message. Real justice isn't flimsy. It builds something that lasts forever. Verses 15 and 17, these are all about raising the next generation, and it's a super clear cause and effect. Verse 15 shows that discipline, it's like a stake in the ground guiding a young tree. It helps it grow straight and strong. Without it, the tree just grows all crooked and wild. And the result? Well, verse 17 says it gives you peace. It's like a parent's heart is a stormy sea that finally becomes calm and peaceful after they provide that loving correction. Now verses 16 and 18 zoom way out to look at where society is headed. Verse 16 makes this incredible promise. Yeah, wickedness might rise up like a giant tidal wave, but eventually that wave will crest and crash down on itself. The righteous, though, they'll still be standing. And verse 18 tells us why. Without a vision from God, people are just wandering around aimlessly in a thick fog, bumping into each other. But with vision, it's like a spotlight hits a path, and they can walk with purpose and confidence. All right, here we are at the final part of our journey. And this is where it gets really personal. It's the ultimate internal test, focusing on those core character flaws that really decide which path we end up on: pride, anger, and fear. So verses 19, 20, and 21 are like 3 quick-fire character sketches. First, verse 19, you have a stubborn servant and words just bounce off him like water off a duck's back. Then you've got verse 20, a guy who speaks too fast and his words just fly out of his mouth like arrows he can't control. And then, get this, in verse 21, a master pampers his servant so much that the servant slowly starts to think he's the son and heir and begins to demand the inheritance. Verses 22 and 23 tackle 2 hugely destructive forces. In verse 22, picture an angry man dragging a stick through perfectly calm water. He just leaves this turbulent, messy wake behind him. That's strife, just pure, unnecessary chaos. Then in verse 23, a person's pride is like a giant, overinflated balloon, floating higher and higher until a tiny, sharp pin called humility comes along, and pop, it's gone. It all comes crashing down. Verse 24 feels like a scene straight out of a courtroom thriller. There's a person on the witness stand. They've sworn to tell the truth, but there is a heavy, rusty padlock on their lips. Why? Because they're a partner with the thief. They're totally trapped by their own bad choices, forced into a silence that makes them hate their own life. And that brings us to verse 25, which is really the heart of the entire chapter. It lays out the 2 choices, side by side, so clearly. On one side, you have a person walking really carefully, but their feet keep getting caught in all these hidden traps and snares. That's what fearing other people does. But on the other side, you see a person walking confidently through that same dangerous field, but they're inside this transparent protective bubble. They're completely safe. That's what trust in the Lord looks like. And the last 2 verses, 26 and 27, they really lock in the difference between these 2 paths. Verse 26 shows this long, long line of people waiting, just hoping for a little bit of favor from an earthly king. But high above them, you see a single, direct line of light connecting one person straight to heaven for justice. And finally, verse 27 gives us this final image: 2 figures, one made of light and one of shadow, standing back to back. They're so fundamentally different they can't even look at each other. So after this whole journey, after seeing the path of ruin and the path of rejoicing, it really all comes back to this one powerful promise from verse 25. This is the destination. This is the goal of the righteous path: safety. Not found in our own strength, not found in what people think, but found in trusting the Lord. So this chapter has laid out this incredible blueprint, right? Cause and effect. 2 paths built by our character, by our words, and by where we place our trust. The only question left is for you. With every choice you make today, which one of those paths are you building?